So thank you so much, Uva, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I remember I first saw you speak at the launch event for the Workforce Initiative, and you were engaging the whole room in this conversation about how does education and workforce development align in Philadelphia.
I think companies who understand that it starts with diversity, you need to be thoughtful about who you bring in, and it's not just gender, it's race, it's ethnicity, it's background, it's socioeconomics as well, right? So when you really create a diverse environment, that's a good start. The follow-up is, how are you creating policies? How are you thinking about processes? How are you thinking about competencies? How are you thinking about the way that you evaluate performance, right? And really thinking with an inclusive lens. That's a whole different approach, right? That takes a lot of work. Mentoring then can become a tool. It is our responsibility, right? Once you've gone through a door, it's your responsibility to make a decision. You get to decide whether you want to be a gatekeeper or a door opener, right? And I think about mentorship in that way. Do you want to, once you've gone through that door, open that door a little bit wider for the next person and encourage them to come in? Or do you want to shut it, right? And be the person that kind of stands there at the door and says, you don't belong here. You get to make a decision as a leader. And I think the more individuals, whether it's women, people of color, all of us, the more we embrace this idea of being door openers and expand, widen the table, the more rich the conversation, the work, the thinking, and the end result can be. So I think mentoring becomes a tool to optimize the results that companies have.
What is your knowledge, or what do you see the particular challenges being that face Latino communities, immigrant communities, and what are some of the ways in which this kind of workforce development and education initiatives can address that or serve those communities? Sure.
I tend to focus on what I call the bias undercurrent. And that is not the explicit thing. It is the feeling that you get when you're sitting in a meeting and perhaps you are the only woman or one of a few women, and you voice something and it just falls on deaf ears. And suddenly someone else with a different identity, perhaps a man, right, says the same thing, and it's suddenly heard, right? You have those moments where you think, is it me? That kind of undercurrent shows up on a daily basis for many of us. And that's the work that I have signed up to do, to work with organizations who have an undercurrent of something, right, that they can't quite put their finger on it, and to figure out how to uproot that thing and really figure out a way to move their organization forward. Sometimes that means that I will have a very forceful hand and voice, and at other times it just calls for a conversation. It really does depend, but that is, my experiences have been varied. I can tell you today that there are opportunities and rooms that are wide open for me, and that still today there are quite a few opportunities that are not as readily available, and moments where, again, it's not the explicit thing that's said, but it's the thing that's done or unsaid that lets me know that that space is not necessarily inclusive. And as painful as that is, it doesn't stop me from showing up, continuing to show up, and from engaging in a conversation about what I'm seeing. So the best tool that's available to me today is voice, and I use it every single time I can to make sure that we are addressing the undercurrent of bias.